the back hear me okay? I'm usually loud enough not to need a microphone. Yeah, cool. Cool. Okay, so I'll start off introducing myself. My name is Gendry Morales. I'm CEO and co-founder of the Flight Plan. And my background is in computer science, and I started off as a back-end developer. But I've worked in large corporates and banks for a lot of my career in digital delivery, and more recently have moved more into product, UX, and design. I've been interested in cryptocurrency for a while, but it probably wasn't until I met my co-founder Naz over here, and we saw Ethereum for the first time. And or maybe if you guys close the door, it's a bit noisy now.
Do you take the mic?
Oh, I do need the mic?
Yes, please.
Is that better? Yeah, awesome. Alright, this one works, so yeah, let's not get too tricky. Okay, so when Naz and I saw Ethereum for the first time, I guess this idea of a world computer really got us starting to think about what could be possible with blockchain, but we're incredibly pragmatic, so we didn't really kind of cook up all of these different blockchain ideas. We thought, okay, cool, like how can we actually build something that people interact with in the technology? And so that really got us into the space of decentralized applications and starting to really focus on what are the characteristics and interesting things about blockchain and what would those experiences look like in a different way. So last year we built, it seems like it's a totally crazy idea, these crypto cats, so like digital collectible cats on the blockchain, mainly because it was weird and we thought that it'd be something fun to kind of start with our little experiment on how to build a decentralized application. And then these crypto kitties came along and then everyone was like, aha, we get what you're up to, trying to help with this like mainstream adoption problem. But we didn't really want to be kind of like cat billionaires, although I'm always surprised at how interesting those cats are. We wanted to really help people with how to get into this space and take out a lot of the barriers. So that's why we cooked up the idea for Flight Plan. So what is Flight Plan? It's a design suite for blockchain, and it's easier to see it rather than try to explain it. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of the use cases we've got running on it at the moment, and more importantly, I'm going to show you like what are the techniques that we actually used to get from like this big blockchain idea down to the first working prototype. And what we've been really trying to do is be able to do that really quick. So all of these use cases, we actually got to the first working prototype in 5 days. And we want to keep making that process quicker and easier for people so they can really start to play with how might we be able to use blockchain. But before we talk about I guess a proof of concept, the first thing we really need to talk about is the blockchain idea. And I mean, Jason Potts is fantastic, but I think that when we hear him speak, your mind starts like imagining all of the possibilities. How could we use, what did you call it, like manufactured trust in organizations, and how could we like totally decentralize, the way entire industries worked and totally disrupt that. And it's got this effect like a virus on your brain coming up with all of these cool ideas. But when you try to explain one of those ideas to someone else, it doesn't look so much like this to them. It looks a bit more like a hoarder's garage. So this blockchain ideas tend to be this kind of colossal mess of other ideas that don't quite make sense together. So the first thing that we really need to do in order to do a proof of concept is tidy that shit up. Okay? So this is like KonMari method, which is like very minimalist and disciplined way of like tidying up your place. But from like a product and UX kind of technique perspective, that's why we use things like canvases. So people might have seen things like the lean canvas before, but we developed this one for blockchain that really looks at the things that are really important to understand if you had one page to describe your idea. So what are the customer problems you're trying to solve? Really super important to tie back to that. Why blockchain? Okay, what is blockchain going to give you that is better than a product today? I don't think a lot of people do enough of this, which is competitive differentiation. Okay, what are other people in this ecosystem doing at the moment, and how is your idea different or special? who are your key customers, what are their problems, and then at the bottom here we've got a whole bunch around, I think we've got all of these really interesting and new different types of business models or mechanism design to play with. If you're going to use tokens, what is the actual incentive design and how are you going to use that as well, so we can actually start to articulate it. So that's cool. So once we've actually started to understand the idea, we can start to focus on the users. So who are the people? What are their problems? And this is where I'm going to introduce the first use case, and I'll use this one as an example. So this one's called Mallow, and this is a fashion supply chain using blockchain. And the focus areas for this one is it's about boutique fashion and being sustainable or transparent about the supply chain and what's happening there. But let's talk about the actors. So we've got Alice here, who's the consumer. So she wants it all. She wants something fashionable. She wants to pay a fair price for it, but she also wants a transparency. We've got Bob, who's the fashion designer. So he wants to, make beautiful clothing that's transparent, but he also wants to make a living. And then we've got Carol, the producer, who is probably pretty busy doing the kind of production, or might be farming, for example, but they want to elevate their reputation. And then we start to analyze what do those interactions look like today. And I think in the panel discussion, a few people were talking about this idea of it kind of looking for where are some of the responsibilities starting to cluster. So in this, actually, we start to realize that Bob, the designer, he's really orchestrating the entire supply chain from sourcing and production through to actually consumer demand and sales and marketing, right? So that's like pretty stressful doing all of those different things. Then we move on to step 3, which is why blockchain? Okay, so now that we understand the users, how they're interacting, understand a bit about the concept, what are the things that blockchain gives us that might be able to help, right? And we want to simulate that and say, okay, how could disintermediation actually help in this ecosystem? So we've got disintermediation, we've got a few points there. We've got authenticity, permanence, so this is where I think a lot of the supply chain provenance kind of concepts come in, and that idea of immutability that we get with blockchain, but also scarcity as well. And we kind of use these as ways to think about what are characteristics or affordances that blockchain has given us to be able to work with from a design perspective. And then this is what these guys came up with. So we're really shifting this focus now from Bob, the designer, being the one that's actually orchestrating the entire supply chain, to starting to codify those rules and be able to have more of a decentralized supply chain here. So to kind of go through them, in terms of that disintermediation, really feel like that's where a lot of the mechanism design techniques come in, where we actually look at, so in this concept, they said, we can get Alice, the consumer, to actually kind of pre-purchase or use that kind of crowdfunding to reduce waste. So if there's products or like designs that she doesn't like the look of, she's not going to buy them. So why even make them in the first place? And then in terms of, Bob and Carol and all of the producers kind of involved there, let's use blockchain to help disintermediate and manage your payments, sort out, escrow and all of that kind of counterparty risk that happens. And, potentially if you're working with lots of people in different countries, we've got all sorts of currencies to transfer through to as well. So that's another aspect of it. Another one of the rules that they came up with this ecosystem is only trusted producers can participate, so that that in this supply chain, only people that are doing the transparent practices, kind of as verified by the designer, can really only participate. One of the aspects of scarcity that they used is, so in fashion, it's actually a really cool thing, if anyone's heard of Supreme before, for fashion to use kind of limited editions around things, so we can actually codify that in. And then really kind of at the end, like what we get when we do all of these things is a byproduct, is that transparency and provenance of all of the transactions, if we can actually motivate people to participate in a supply chain like this. And then one of the tools that we use to actually model this, because mechanism design is kind of hard if you're not also thinking about those different actors and their user experience. So we want to simulate it. So here at the top left, we've got, who are all the different actors? What's the goal of the system? What are the goals of all of the different users, and how can we align them? And then we start to look at different mechanism design options and actually start to simulate them out. And then we can layer on, do we need a token? How is that going to help us? Are we going to use it as a way to incentivize or reward people? Or maybe there are different penalties we can add. And then we start to kind of build out and deconstruct and then layer these different aspects on instead of trying to do them all at once. Okay, so step 4 is where the hell to start, right? Because that's still big, right? Even though we've given it some structure and form, what's the first thing that we actually build? So, finding this first actor who you need to onboard is a really important next part. And it's this process of almost rewinding. If I think about this concept, maybe you've got this idea that, okay, cool, I can look at, where my item of clothing came from, and I can see all of the transactions. Cool, so in order to have that, what is the thing that, okay, so someone would have had to produce it. All right, so we step back. So we need to get the producer on board. Okay, and then we step back again. Well, how did the producer get the order in the first place? Oh, the customer had to buy it. Okay, that's, we start to keep going back all the way to get to, okay, for the customer to buy it, Bob actually needed to put the design onto the chain. And then we go, cool, did anything need to happen before that? No, cool, that's where we need to start. And so I found that sometimes we've got to go back 5 or sometimes even 10 steps to find out, where is that beginning point. But once we've identified who is that first actor and what's the action, so in this case, Bob's actually putting that fashion design onto the chain, ready for crowdfunding, then we can start to unpack the detail further. And then we get into the world of actually looking at what's Bob's journey, and we start to build kind of wireframes. So in terms of actually to onboard, so this is right into the specifics now. In terms of actually onboarding Bob, we need to somehow introduce the concept in him. And we found from a lot of the user research we've done that, most people find it's they probably don't even get past that first step because it's confusing to understand. There's a whole bunch of jargon or lingo, right? So introducing that concept really succinctly and well is really important. Then we've got to give Bob the ability to quite easily put data onto the chain. We've got some feedback around transaction completion, and then we're actually able to view those records. So this is kind of like an emerging design pattern in the user flow that's coming out. And that's what Flight Plan is built around. And then step 5, we are ready to get some data onto the chain. And for the tech nerds, this is the exciting bit. Okay, so this is Flight Plan, and what you can see is we've got the 4 screens. So we're introducing the concept here for Melbourne. We're getting Bob to add he's going to add a beanie design to the chain, giving some confirmation about what happened, and then he's able to view it. But I think we have time to actually do it. Cool, we can say that. So, Bob can have a look through, and I'm not going to go through kind of all of the concept, but maybe he's really creative and he calls himself the Bob, and he's got 10 beanies that he wants to add to the chain. There's some kind of special beanie, I don't really know, the blockchain beanie, and everyone's going to tell their friends about it. And what we're doing here with this design, so this idea of hashing gives us a really interesting way to keep something off the chain, but be able to verify that it's the legitimate, the authentic piece. So we've got that, which is an interesting kind of element to play with. And then we can submit that information onto the chain. And the demo gods have been nice. So one of the things with working with public blockchain is transactions take a little while. So we don't want to kind of hold up the user flow for that. We want to get straight to, that history page and what are some of the other designs that are actually up there at the moment. And so you can see, this transaction is still in progress here. But if we go and have a look, so this is really on the chain, so you can, I'll have the links in my slides and you can go and have a look and explore it as well behind the scenes. Let's see, let's have a look at Bob's other beanie. So what you can see here is some of the transactions, so one of the transactions on the chain. You can also see the contract that runs it as well. And I guess this is some of the power of working on public blockchain is, we can trust the result. So this is contract, really simple contract. You might be able to even read it. We're putting 3 fields onto the chain here, and it's calling this set input function. But one of the powers here is that everyone can see the logic and the rules of that contract, and everyone can start to see those transactions. And even though we're working with this technology, we couldn't do anything to change those immutable records or the immutable code in that contract. Here we go, we've got our transaction confirmed. So you can have a look at what that looks like. So you can see it's early days, so we've got just eight block confirmations at the moment. That'll just keep rising. Cool, so you can start to see some of the behind the scenes here. So behind the scenes of this screen is where we've got those 3 fields going onto the chain. And then you saw before when I tapped on that kind of information, you could start to see, what do those transaction records look like behind the scenes. And really from a user experience perspective, this is the kind of stuff on the right here that, for most of the cypherpunks out there, pretty happy to read it in that form. But geez, it's nice and people get to really play more with the visual elements and design around actually how do we describe what it looks like a few layers up the stack. Which brings me on to what is running behind the scenes. And for anyone who's actually built a decentralized application before, you'll know that it's quite involved. So it can take a while to kind of pull together the infrastructure and technology. So all of our flight plan templates run on blockchain backend using Ethereum Rupston testnet. With any decentralized application, you've typically got data on the chain and off the chain that you've got to contend with. So we host using Firebase. We built it in React and use the Web3 JavaScript libraries to actually connect through to the chain. And that whole world is kind of still building out a lot more and getting better and better every day. All right, here's another concept. So a really different kind of idea. This one's called Ask, and it's around data provenance and decentralized insights for public data sources. So if you think about there's a public data source, maybe it's, hospital wait times for the DHHS. And, we know that this comes from that government department. We can actually start to decentralize, how do we get the data scientists out there to create insights off that data. But when we actually report it in the news, we can actually see that trace. So that's one of the concepts these guys are working on. And we've got 3 actors in this again. So we've got Alice, who's that public institution, Bob, the journalist, and Carol, the data scientist, who all play different roles in this ecosystem. And in terms of that first user that they really needed to start with, this, nothing really happens in this ecosystem until we get one of the, so Alice to actually put data onto the chain. And I put this kind of key thing here because I think there's an opportunity to think about some of these public addresses and how we can actually build a bit more kind of reputation and identity so that we know that, wow, when it comes from that public key, that is that department, for example, and we can build almost that extra layer of trust into the system. So once it's on the chain there, then it's really ready for us to actually start to build out the concept for the next part, which is where Carol, the data scientist, can actually start to develop insights off that. And a whole bunch of really interesting things happening in blockchain at the moment around data science challenges. All right, another concept. So supply chain again, but this one is Daisy Chain is a focus on supply chain with the use of satellite imagery and image recognition to kind of automate a part of the things that make it hard for farmers. And WWF actually, they do a lot of work in this space, and they're coming up with some really good kind of niche ideas, for different parts in supply chain to focus on. So here we've got Bob entering his location, and actually he really just needs to enter one field, and the rest we're actually automating. You can see here we've got the satellite imagery, which is the thing we're really connecting to. And satellite imagery really provides information about the farm. So in this case, it's the stock to land ratio, which gives us an idea of, is Bob and his farm doing sustainable practices? So when we start to look at the ecosystem, we've kind of got Bob providing his location, satellite imagery, but an opportunity for public institutions to then automatically give Bob, rewards for doing the right thing, and then of course the consumer can see it all. And one of the really interesting things that came out of this proof of concept when we started thinking about it, you'll notice I haven't talked a lot about keys and wallets yet. And so in this concept and in all of them, there is considerations for how do you think about the different actors, some of their barriers to entry, and how would you actually architect their keys. So maybe for Bob, if he's out on the farm, we're probably not going to say to him, unless he's crypto savvy, crypto savvy farmers, maybe this team is going to find them first. We actually want more of a guided experience with Bob, so maybe we'll go out and help him actually set up a public key. In an institution, you really don't want one person holding the private key, right? So you want to be looking at maybe a multi-sig wallet. For the satellite imagery, we probably don't want anyone holding that private key, right? So we want to have that more system-driven. And then for the consumer, to view information, you don't need a key at all. So what is step 6? Well, it's kind of like hurry up, right? So if you're thinking, how do we actually dip our toe in the water and start to kind of experiment with this? I think that's a good one. But also, there's a really good opportunity to be a pioneer in this new land, because the people that are starting to actually work with the technology, start to iterate, test it with users, are the ones that are actually going to start really building out their concepts. And especially in public blockchain space, anything you build, other people can start to build upon as well. So it's not really just about one use case, but that starts to be something useful that everyone can connect to. So I have a few takeaways for you. So the first one is think small, really small, tiny, and really focus on that first actor that you need to start with. The second one is focus on the experience design. There's a lot of barriers at the moment, so for anyone who's used cryptocurrency, there's a lot of concepts to understand, so if you can architect the keys in a clever way or target your first customers around ones that are crypto savvy, that definitely goes a long way. Number 3 is know why you're using blockchain, don't just hashtag it in. Really work with some of the affordances it gives you and see how does that actually solve problems for the customers or for that kind of ecosystem. And then the 4th one is work on the tech. You learn a lot more by understanding how it works behind the scenes and really getting a sense of it. I do think that it's a technology that you actually do need to understand a bit of the technology to understand its power. And there's no better way than starting with something small. So if you want to hear more about what we're doing at Flightplan, we're essentially building a design suite for blockchain and looking at how we actually incorporate a decentralized design community to help build really good proof of concepts. And we're looking for our first kind of protocols as well to integrate with, so to make it easier for protocols to get use cases built on them. And if I go back to the beginning, when we were talking about how to actually do a proof of concept, I think a really important question is why do a proof of concept? And one of the things that's really hard with blockchain is you might be able to see your idea, but other people can't. So to be able to do a proof of concept means that people can actually see what you mean and play with it and interact and see what that first starting point looks like, and that's super powerful. So get your concept on the chain, and of course, if you need any help, contact us. Thank you very much. I believe we might have time for a few questions. Yes?
I don't know if it's a basic question or not, but
Go for it.
So I'm just
Yeah.
going to go for it. So if I understand Hash's you're only storing the hash on the blockchain, which points towards the file itself. But what happens if that file gets deleted?
Yeah, so you can't produce the file from the hash, right?
No.
Yeah. So if it gets deleted, yeah, that's generally a problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
But to go further into that, so these are the things to think about, and I think this is why it's good to understand a bit about what is a hash in the first place and how do we actually use it. I think we know how we use it in kind of protocol, levels and at the blockchain level, but like how do we use that in more of a kind of user perspective? So it's really interesting working with some designers and seeing, what do we like in a hash? Is it like a seal on an envelope, or what thing in the world today is it most like, so that we understand a bit more how to use it? Yeah. But yeah, it could be like throwing away the key. Yeah. Any more questions? Yeah.
Someone with a bit of development background, what's the biggest misconception when trying to communicate with people who are not really familiar with the technical aspects of blockchain?
Yeah, so I think in the tech world we have to be really careful not to use too much of the really functional language. So I'm guilty of that. So that's one of the things that makes it really hard. So understanding the language that people are using is really important. But I think one of the misconceptions, like one of the tech misconceptions, is that it must be really hard to, develop smart contracts. And actually, that's one of the parts that we've got the most patterns in. We've got really good frameworks now about how that works. So it's actually harder to think about, okay, we've got this entire ecosystem of contracts running. How would we actually be able to use them and pull them together in something that makes sense and solves a real customer problem? They're the things that are actually really hard. So for us, we spent a lot of time doing front-end development, to bridge those kind of gaps, and doing research on how are users understanding what they're looking at, whether it's hashes or whether it's a word like, this is a so funny video around, I think it was Joe Rogan? Yeah, anyway, they were doing a video of what does it immutable mean? They're like, does it mean to not mute? What does it mean? And it just makes you realise, for people who are we call them no-coiners, for people who are new to crypto, they have no idea what's going on. But there's a really interesting bridge to gap there. Yeah.
So why is it important, in your mind, for the users to actually have that UX experience with, say, hashes or the underlying detail? Why have you tied the two so close together?
Yeah, so we play with that idea, right? You're dealing with multiple personas and users as well, right? So say the hash. I haven't figured out a more clever way to describe the hash, but when we do, it probably won't look like a hash, right? And even the strings of numbers and letters, I think that there's a few people researching different ways of doing that. But at the moment, Josh this morning talking about we don't trust, we verify, right? And there's no better way to verify than just having the clear text there. And then the other thing I'll kind of overlay on that is that at the moment, most of the people using decentralized applications are somewhat crypto savvy. So actually, we're designing for them at the moment, and we're trying to design for the next lot of users who are the next kind of early adopters, but not the kind of Mars and Pars that maybe have no idea. Although that idea is not off the table if we can be clever around the keys. You know where I'm going with that. Yeah.
Hey, thank you for the talk. First of all, that was terrific. I kind of feel like blockchain and crypto at the moment is a bit like where the internet was before Mozilla, before a web interface. And kind of the killer applications were email and the web browser. With everything you're seeing and all the concepts you're doing, do you see an actual equivalent kind of user interface killer app moment? And other than cute kitty cats, what do you think that might be?
will learn a lot of the patterns around adoption from digital collectibles and games. That's where people are really pushing the boundaries in terms of the way that works. But I think the really interesting use cases, I don't know, I'm fascinated with supply chain and how we kind of organize as a human race. I know that sounds really big and I'm really pragmatic, but I think how we actually organize work and start to think about that. But I don't think that's going to happen overnight. I think we'll see it in really tiny use cases. Kind of reminds me of like Amazon and Jeff Bezos with this crazy idea to sell books, but there was a bigger kind of dream behind that. So I don't think they'll look amazing in the beginning, but actually they'll be developing something that will become amazing in the future. So I think I'm out of time, but yeah, come and see me or Naz afterwards. Thank you very much.